In a city filled with glittering lights and quiet divisions, power often masks vulnerability, and prejudice often looms large. One night, a billionaire's powerlessness collides with a young waitress's quiet strength. An encounter that changes them both and exposes truths that money can never hide. Follow us to the end to find out what happened. The restaurant on 56th Street glimmered like a jewel in the fading twilight. Its brass handles caught the last orange embers of the sun, and its tall glass windows reflected the city's restless veins of traffic. Outside, the air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts and exhaust, a mixture uniquely Manhattan. Inside, though, Maison Lenox was another world. Polished marble floors, chandeliers dripping with golden light, waiters gliding like dancers between tables, draped in ivory linen. It was the kind of place where a glass of water seemed more valuable than a meal in other neighborhoods. Amara Johnson tied the knot of her apron with deliberate precision, fingers trembling only slightly, as they had every evening since she started. At 23, she had already learned the unspoken rules of places like this. Keep your smile small but visible, your voice soft but firm, your presence noticeable only when summoned. She was good at her job, not just competent, but meticulous. Shoes polished, hair always tied back in a neat ponytail, uniform pressed until even the chef's scowl softened. Yet no matter how flawless she performed, she knew she was seen as different. Not because she stumbled, but because she was black in a sea of white collars and white skin. She leaned against the employee lockers for a moment, checking the small mirror taped inside the door. Her mother's words echoed again. Walk with dignity, even when they won't give you the floor. The lines of her face, soft but strong, reminded her of that guidance every day. Her mother had been a nurse, and dignity had been her only inheritance when illness stole her too soon. Amara inhaled deeply. She was ready for the night, or at least she told herself she was. At table 12, under the soft glow of a chandelier, Richard Langston adjusted the cufflinks of his suit. Worth more than the average college tuition, they shimmered discreetly against the midnight blue wool of his jacket. To most, he looked untouchable. A billionaire, a leader of tech empires, the kind of man whispered about in glossy magazines. But tonight, none of that mattered, because on his lap sat Theo, his 11-month-old son, red-faced, fists clenched, his tiny lungs producing a cry that sliced through the restaurant's elegant facade. Richard tried everything. The pacifier, the toy shaped like a rocket, gentle rocking. Sweat gathered at his collar as his assistant whispered suggestions he couldn't even process. Across the room, forks hovered mid-air. Conversations dimmed. Somewhere near the bar, a man muttered, "This isn't a daycare." The words stung, not because Richard hadn't heard worse, but because he suddenly felt powerless. He, the master of mergers and acquisitions, could not quiet his child. He kissed Theo's temple, murmuring, "It's okay, buddy. Please." But the baby screamed louder, and Richard's mind replayed the nightmarish truth. Theo's mother was gone. 3 months now. Gone in her sleep, leaving him alone with grief and fatherhood he never trained for. And now, the eyes of Manhattan's elite bored into him like lasers. "You're failing," the voices inside whispered. "You're not enough." In the kitchen, Amara balanced a tray of wine glasses when the sound of the baby's wail reached her. Sharp, desperate, unignorable. She froze, the weight of the tray steady in her hands, but the weight of something else pressing on her chest. Memories rose unbidden, children clinging to her at the grief camp summers ago, sobbing into her shirt, trusting her steady breath when words were useless. She had soothed them, not with tricks, but with presence. She knew that sound. It wasn't fussing, it was pain, confusion, loss too big for such a small chest. She placed the tray carefully on the counter and peeked past the velvet curtain. She saw him, the billionaire everyone recognized from magazine covers, and the baby, red and trembling. Around them, the room's patience frayed like a rope about to snap. And she saw him too. The helplessness in the CEO's eyes, a mirror of her own nights standing by her mother's hospital bed. Her manager, Troy, caught her lingering. "Amara," he hissed, back on task. But she barely heard him. Her heart was already moving her feet. She approached the table, her voice calm, her arms open. "May I try?" she asked softly. Richard's eyes lifted to hers. He didn't see her uniform, her skin, or her place on the restaurant ladder. He only saw the plea in her gaze, steady and quiet. For a moment, pride wrestled with desperation. Then he nodded. Amara took the baby into her arms, pressed him gently against her shoulder, and breathed slowly. One breath. Another. Within moments, Theo's cries dissolved into hiccups, then silence. The restaurant froze, not the silence of tension, but of awe. Forks paused mid-air. Even the jazz from the corner seemed to hush. For the first time in hours, Richard exhaled fully. Yet not everyone approved. From table 7, a man in a tailored suit leaned back, smirking. "Of course," he whispered to his companions, "kids always calm for the help." His friends chuckled, the kind of laugh that avoided confrontation. And across the room, a woman in silk murmured, "She must have been a nanny." That kind of touch doesn't come from nowhere. Her words floated like poison, but Amara didn't flinch. She kept rocking Theo, her face serene. Inside, though, her heart swelled and ached all at once. She had become invisible too many times. Tonight, she was seen, but not as herself, as a stereotype, a projection. Still, she held on, whispering nothing at all, letting her presence speak louder than the noise. And Richard watched, something shifting inside him. For months, he had been surrounded by wealth, advisors, endless noise, and none of it brought peace. Now, in the arms of a young woman society dismissed, his son finally slept. "Thank you," Richard whispered later, when Theo's breathing evened. Amara adjusted the baby carefully before replying, "You're welcome." She didn't look for gratitude. She only gave what she knew: humanity. The night wasn't over. At the service station, Amara leaned against the counter, her hands trembling from the weight of it all. She had only done what instinct demanded, but she couldn't shake the look on Richard's face. A man stripped of power, grateful for a grace he couldn't buy. What she didn't know was that this moment, the quiet between them, the baby's peace in her arms, was the beginning of a story neither of them could have foreseen. A story about race, power, silence, and the courage it takes to be human in a world that forgets too easily. And for now, the city outside hummed, oblivious to the fragile revolution that had just begun. The morning after felt colder than it should have. Not because of the weather. Manhattan in late September was still clinging to the remnants of summer, but because the memory of the night before lingered like a bruise. Amara stood at the edge of her narrow bed in the Brooklyn walk-up she shared with 3 roommates. The early light crept through a crack in the blinds, striping her face with gold and shadow. She had slept little. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the child whose sobs had shaken an entire restaurant, and the billionaire father who had sat helpless, undone, until she stepped forward. She pressed her palms against her face, whispering almost to herself, "Why did I even?" But she knew the answer. She had acted because silence was impossible. Because she had learned long ago that some cries demand a response. Maison Lennox had not forgotten either. By mid-afternoon, when Amara arrived for her next shift, she could feel the weight of stares before she even stepped fully inside. Waiters clustered by the bar stopped talking the second she appeared. Their eyes darted away, then back again, full of curiosity sharpened by something colder. Envy, maybe, or judgment. The maitre d', normally polite if clipped, greeted her with a smile that looked pasted on. She tied her apron in the locker room with the same precision as always. Hands steady, breaths even. Walk with dignity, she reminded herself. The uniform, crisp and pressed, was her armor. But armor didn't make her invisible. The whispers began that evening as soon as the first wave of regulars arrived. Table 4, a group of lawyers who always ordered 2 bottles of Bordeaux before appetizers, leaned together, one of them muttering, "That's her," the nanny waitress. Table 9, a pair of women in designer dresses, openly turned their heads as Amara passed, their eyes dragging over her face as though measuring how someone like her had dared to exist at the center of last night's spectacle. Even the staff couldn't resist. In the kitchen, a busboy grinned and asked, "So, you famous now?" Another whispered to the line cook, "Bet she gets a raise." Troy, the manager, cut them short with a sharp "back to work," but his eyes flicked toward Amara, with that same unease as yesterday. It wasn't the kind of attention that lifted. It was the kind that pressed down, squeezing her chest, reminding her of all the invisible lines she wasn't supposed to cross. And then, as if fate had a cruel sense of timing, the CEO returned. Richard Langston walked through the doors of Maison Lennox as if nothing had happened, though the room seemed to lean into his presence. Heads turned, voices lowered. His suit was darker this time, almost black. His tie, a subdued charcoal. His face looked less composed, though, like a man who hadn't slept much. But he wasn't alone. He carried Theo in one arm, the baby dressed in pale blue, golden hair curling slightly at the edges. The child looked calm now, thumb in mouth, blue eyes wide and watchful. A hush spread across the dining room. It wasn't the awe of seeing a billionaire. It was curiosity, sharpened into something else. Would the scene repeat? Would the spectacle return? Richard requested a table in the corner, away from the piano. He didn't glance around the room like most wealthy men did, demanding to be seen. Instead, he walked as though the floor might crack beneath his weight. And when Amara approached, carrying water as she had done 1,000 times before, he looked up. Their eyes met. "Amara," he said simply. Not miss, not waitress. Her name. The sound of it, spoken in his voice, startled her more than she expected. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, setting down the glass. He hesitated, then shifted Theo slightly against his chest. The baby reached one small hand toward Amara, as if recognizing her. Richard glanced at his son, then back at her. "Would you, just for a moment?" Gasps stirred among nearby diners. The audacity of it, handing his child to a waitress in front of Manhattan's elite, was almost scandalous. But Richard didn't seem to care. His hands, steady in boardrooms, trembled slightly as he extended the baby toward her. Amara froze. Every instinct told her this wasn't safe. Not for her reputation, not for her job. Troy's eyes burned into her from the bar. Yet when Theo whimpered, something in her chest tightened, and she found herself reaching out. The child nestled against her shoulder instantly, thumb slipping free of his mouth, his breathing slowing. A hush descended again, heavier than the night before. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the pianist's fingers faltered. Amara rocked him gently, eyes downcast, refusing to meet the stares that pricked her skin like needles. "Thank you," Richard murmured, voice low, private. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. But not everyone stayed silent. At table 7, the same table where laughter had cut her the night before, the silver-haired man chuckled darkly. "See? Told you. Built-in nanny. Diversity program pays off." His companions forced polite laughter, eyes sliding away from Amara's face. Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Richard's eyes, though, darkened. He turned slowly toward the man, his expression a mixture of ice and something far more dangerous. For a moment, the air vibrated with the threat of confrontation. But then Richard exhaled, shook his head, and looked back at Amara. "This city," he said softly, "doesn't deserve grace." Later, in the employee corridor, Troy cornered her. His jaw was tight, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? This is not your role, Amara. You are not here to play savior. You are here to serve." She met his glare, her own eyes steady, though her stomach churned. "I didn't ask for this," she replied quietly. "He asked me." "Exactly," Troy snapped. "And now everyone thinks—" He cut himself off, lowering his voice as another waiter passed. "Do you know how fragile our reputation is? You are not the story here. Don't make yourself one." Amara wanted to laugh at the absurdity. She was the story, whether she wanted it or not. But she only straightened her apron and said, "With respect, Troy, sometimes people need more than service." The look he gave her was cold enough to freeze. When her shift ended, she slipped out into the night, the city buzzing with life as though nothing monumental had happened inside those golden walls. She walked fast, sneakers tapping the pavement, breath clouding faintly in the cooling air. But her mind wouldn't quiet. She replayed the baby's sigh of relief against her shoulder. The weight of Richard's gaze, heavy with something she couldn't name. Gratitude? Desperation? Recognition? And the voices. Always the voices. Laughter like knives. Whispers like chains. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her roommate. "Lights out. Don't wake us." She slipped it back, exhaling. For the first time, she wondered if what had begun last night was less about the baby, or the billionaire, and more about her. About what it meant to be seen in a world that only pretended to look. And as she climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, the question echoed in her mind. How long before the weight of all those eyes becomes too heavy to carry? The kitchen of Maison Lennox was always loud. Metal pans clanging, steam hissing from pots, the barked orders of the head chef slicing through the air like a whip. But tonight, beneath the usual chaos, another sound slithered through the tiled room. Whispers. Amara could feel them like a draft against her skin. The weight of eyes pressed into her back as she polished a row of crystal glasses. Her reflection on the glass shimmered, distorted, but still revealed the tight line of her mouth, the stubborn set of her shoulders. She told herself to focus. One glass at a time, Amara. One task. One breath. But the voices would not stay buried. Near the prep station, two waiters leaned close, their words disguised as casual chatter. She thinks she's special now. Of course. Saving the billionaire's baby? That's a story she'll dine on for life. A chuckle followed, sharp as broken glass. Another voice, softer, but no less cutting. Wait until Troy has to deal with her. You know he hates when the staff steps out of line. Amara's grip tightened on the stem of the glass until her knuckles ached. She refused to turn around. She had learned long ago that sometimes the worst retaliation was silence. The silence that let their words fall flat, their cruelty starving without reaction. Still, her chest burned. The head chef stormed past, barking at a line cook about an overcooked fillet. The noise drowned out the whispers for a moment, but when the chef disappeared into the freezer, the hush returned like an echo. A busboy walked by Amara, glancing at her apron, then at her face. "So," he said with a smirk, "what's it like, being the CEO's babysitter?" Amara's head snapped up. His grin faltered under the weight of her eyes, those deep, steady eyes that could slice through arrogance without raising her voice. "I do my job," she said evenly. "The rest is not for you to decide." The busboy flushed, muttered something under his breath, and disappeared into the dining hall. But the sting of his words lingered. Later, as she carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres past the swinging doors into the glittering dining room, she caught sight of Richard Langston again. He wasn't seated like the other patrons. Instead, he stood near the corner table, his son nestled against his chest, speaking quietly to a woman Amara didn't recognize. A consultant, perhaps, judging by the sharp navy dress and tablet in hand. His eyes flickered toward Amara, a brief glance, but long enough to make her chest tighten. Theo's small hand reached upward, grasping his father's tie, tugging playfully. For the first time since she had seen him, the child wasn't crying. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the burn of 100 eyes, not just Richard's, but the diners who watched her pass, their whispers trailing behind like smoke. That's her, the girl with the baby, the one who... It was as if her identity had shrunk to one moment, one act. Everything else, her studies at NYU, the nights volunteering at grief camp, the countless hours of unseen labor, erased by a single narrative she had never asked to write. When her shift ended, the kitchen was no quieter. In fact, the whispers had sharpened into open speculation. She'll be gone in a week. Either he'll hire her, or Troy will fire her. She should just quit before she embarrasses herself. Amara set down her tray, removed her apron, and turned to face them. Her voice, when it came, was calm, but edged with steel. "Do you know what dignity is?" she asked, her eyes sweeping the small group. "It's not what they give you in this place. It's what you carry, even when they try to strip it away." The room froze. Even the dishwasher paused mid-scrub, water dripping from his gloves. Amara folded her apron neatly, placed it on the counter, and walked out without another word. Outside, the night air struck her like a baptism. Cool, sharp, real. She pulled her jacket tighter and began the long walk to the subway. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her roommate. Rent due next week. Don't forget. She sighed. The world never stopped demanding, never gave her a moment to breathe. And yet, as she descended into the subway's stale, echoing air, her mind returned not to the whispers, not to the rent, but to the image of Theo's small hand clutching at her apron, his breath finally steady against her shoulder. That was the truth. The only truth she wanted to hold on to. She had given comfort when no one else could. And in that subway tunnel, with graffiti smeared across cracked tiles and the rumble of a train approaching, she promised herself something. They can whisper. They can laugh. They can doubt. But they will not decide who I am. The kitchen buzzed with noise, but Amara only heard the whispers. She thinks she's special now. Troy will cut her down soon. Her jaw tightened. She kept polishing silverware until Troy's sharp voice cut through. Office. Now, in the cramped room, Troy leaned across his desk, fingers stabbing the air. You've made yourself a spectacle, twice. Do you think you're here to save Billionaire's babies? Amara met his glare. I did what was human. You're replaceable, he snapped. Maybe. But dignity isn't. Before Troy could reply, the maître d' appeared. Mr. Langston is asking for her. Richard Langston sat at his table, Theo asleep in a stroller. His suit was midnight blue, his face weary. Amara, he said gently. Thank you for coming. Sit. She hesitated. Troy's eyes burned from across the room, but obeyed. Richard studied her. You gave my son peace no one else could. I want to make you an offer. Her heart pounded. What kind of offer? Work for me. Full-time. Be Theo's caregiver. Salary, benefits, support for your studies. Whatever you need. Just say, yes. Amara's breath caught. The weight of the kitchen whispers pressed in. She won't last here. And you think money will erase judgment? She asked, her dark eyes piercing. Richard faltered. Not erase, but give you freedom. Choice. She looked at Theo, his golden hair catching the lamplight, his tiny chest rising and falling. Freedom. Choice. Words she had never been allowed to own. I need time, she said quietly, standing. Richard's voice softened. Take it. But please, consider it. Back in the kitchen. Whispers swirled around her again. But this time, Amara felt something else beneath the noise. The weight of a decision that could change everything. The next evening, Maison Lennox felt like a stage waiting for its play. The chandeliers gleamed brighter, the tables gleamed sharper, and every whisper seemed louder. Amara walked in with her apron pressed, her sneakers spotless. But inside, her chest was a storm. Richard's offer hung over her like a shadow. At table 7, the silver-haired regular smirked as she passed. Careful, gentlemen, he said loudly. She might leave us for richer pastures. Laughter followed. Amara ignored him, but her silence didn't stop the sting. In the kitchen, Troy was waiting, his tie perfectly knotted, his eyes full of steel. You think you can use this place as your audition? He snapped. You're not the story here, Amara. You never will be. Something in her finally cracked. She lifted her chin, her deep black eyes steady. Then why is everyone still talking about me? Gasps rippled through the kitchen. Troy's face reddened. You're done here. Before he could continue, the maître d' appeared again. Mr. Langston requests her presence. Troy's jaw clenched. Of course he does, he muttered. Richard was already standing when Amara arrived, Theo cradled in his arms. The baby stirred, but did not cry, his little hand clutching at Amara's apron the moment she drew near. The room hushed. Diners turned. All eyes landed on her again. Richard's voice was steady, but urgent. Amara, I won't wait any longer. I want you to come with us, tonight, if you'll agree. Her heart pounded. She could feel Troy's stare burning holes into her back, the whispers of diners like venom. Mr. Langston, Troy began, storming forward, his voice sharp. She's an employee here. Not your property. She belongs in this restaurant, not... She belongs where she chooses. Richard cut him off, his tone icy. The room froze. Amara looked between them. The manager who only saw her uniform and the billionaire who offered escape. Both men's voices filled the space, yet neither truly understood the weight she carried. Her chest rose and fell. Then she spoke, louder than she intended. I don't belong to either of you. The chandeliers seemed to tremble in the silence that followed. Diners blinked. Troy's mouth fell open. Even Richard's confident face softened with surprise. Amara's voice steadied. I have served in silence. I have endured whispers, insults, being invisible. But I am not invisible. Not anymore. She placed her hand gently over Theo's, still clutching her apron. I'll decide where I stand. Not you. Not anyone. Richard bowed his head slightly, respect flickering in his eyes. Troy, however, sputtered. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." Amara met his glare without flinching. "Then you'll never see me again." She untied her apron, folded it with precision, and set it on the nearest table. The restaurant was silent. Only the baby's soft breath filled the air. Amara turned, her steps firm, the stairs of the city's elite following her like shadows. For the first time in years, she felt taller than the chandeliers above her. The door of Maison Lennox swung shut behind Amara, the golden light of its chandeliers shrinking into the distance. For the first time, she walked away without looking back. The night air was cool, sharp with the scent of rain on pavement, but it carried no weight heavier than the silence she left behind. Her apron was gone, folded neatly on the table inside. What she carried with her now was not fabric or duty. It was choice. Days later, Amara sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, the city humming outside her window. Rent was still due, bills still piled, life still demanding. But something inside her had shifted. The whispers, the laughter, the accusations, none of them defined her anymore. Her phone buzzed. A message from Richard Langston. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Theo still reaches for you in his sleep. The offer remains on your terms." Amara smiled faintly, setting the phone down. For once, she didn't feel the need to rush an answer. She wasn't choosing out of desperation anymore. She would choose when she was ready, because dignity meant walking into life by her own design. At Maison Lennox, the whispers continued for a while, but slowly the story faded, replaced by the next scandal, the next headline. Yet for those who had witnessed that night, something lingered, the image of a young woman standing tall against judgment, unafraid to claim her humanity. And in Richard's penthouse, Theo's tiny hand sometimes reached for the air, as if searching for the steady heartbeat that had once calmed him. Richard knew then that grace could not be bought. It could only be received, freely given, by those brave enough to offer it. Amara walked through the city one evening, the sun setting behind glass towers. Her reflection in the windows no longer looked like just a waitress or just a girl enduring whispers. It looked like a woman who had stood her ground in the noise and chosen silence on her own terms. Sometimes the world tried to tell her she was invisible, but she had learned the truth. Even in the quietest acts, holding a child, speaking with dignity, walking away with her head high, she was seen. And maybe that was enough. This story is not about wealth or power. It is about presence, dignity, and the courage to resist being defined by others. Amara's journey reminds us that grace often appears where the world least expects it, in the hands of someone overlooked, in the strength of someone underestimated. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more stories that bring us back to what truly matters: humanity beyond the noise.
Thank you for watching.